Good evening. It's October 29th, 2023. Johnny Cash said he saw a UFO in Jamaica. Investigators say that a metallic-looking orb was probably just a party balloon. A shearwater traveled over 1,000 miles trapped inside of a typhoon. And should we use AI to try to study animal communication? Jeff's dog says woof. Woof. I'm Telesma Blue Orb.
I'm Jeff Knox.
I'm Luis Cayetano.
Welcome to the UFO Detox Hour. Last week, we experienced some temporal anomalies and the show went way over time. This week, we will attempt in a very relaxed sort of way to have a show that is 1 hour long, give or take a few minutes, while ensuring that we do not experience any relativistic acceleration. And now for the rebrief. Bellingcat offers an explanation for a popular UAP video from the Pentagon. On Tuesday, Nathan Payton and Logan Williams of Bellingcat published a report on the famous Middle East object, an apparently spherical, metallic-looking object that appears in a video taken by an MQ-9 Reaper drone in July of 2022. The video is declassified, while some information was redacted. Okay, my apologies for the technical difficulties. The video is not playing. But that's the video that we're supposed to be showing. Payton and Williams were able to locate exactly where the video was captured, to a place northeast of Deir ez-Zor, excuse my pronunciation, a city in Syria. Using this information, they were able to figure out the sizes of objects in the video, and from this, figure out the maximum size of the metallic sphere in question. They found that the object is no larger than 0.43 meters, or 1.4 feet in diameter. As previously noted by Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of the U.S. military's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the sphere of the video does not display unusual flight characteristics. The Bellingcat investigators conclude it's very unlikely that the object in the video is anything other than a regular party balloon being carried by the wind. In culture news, the first episode of the Holy Donut Revival Hour is out on YouTube. Only recently announced on social media, independent scholars of the weird S.J. Brick Mojo, and AP Strange posted their first episode of the Holy Donut Revival Hour on YouTube Thursday. The first episode, titled Adventures with the Clown Portal, discusses novel clown rituals, Richard Shaver, the House of David Commune playing baseball against a team of clowns, and so forth. SJ runs a boutique and studies local and weird brick history in the Portland, Oregon area. AP Strange is a writer on the weird and innovator of clown magic. The first episode description reads, quote, "Be healed. The inaugural episode of the Holy Donut Revival Hour is finally here, with all the nonsense you never knew you needed, with absolutely zero Nazis. Guaranteed." Quote. Hawaiian police warn public after the discovery of 3 aerial luminaries. At 8:30 a.m. on Monday, a resident of Pahala in the island of Hawaii, A resident of Pahala in the Ka'u district of the island of Hawaii called police to report the remains of 3 sky lanterns that crashed near their property. Reportedly, one lantern landed on a utility line, another in a person's yard, and a third on the roof of a house. On Tuesday, BigIslandNow.com reported, quote, The Hawaii Police Department would like to remind everyone that possessing and igniting aerial luminaries in the state of Hawaii is prohibited by law HRS 132-19, and those found guilty of violating this law shall be imprisoned for not more than 1 year or fined not more than $1,000 or both for each violation, unquote. In the past several decades, the public has become increasingly concerned with the dangers of sky lanterns, which are propelled by the wind in an unpredictable fashion and can cause serious wildfires, as well as damage to property. In 2013, a sky lantern caused £6 million in property damage in Smethwick, England. In 2015, the National Fire Protection Association updated their fire code to state, quote, "The use of unmanned free-floating sky lanterns and similar devices utilizing an open flame shall be prohibited," unquote. The NFPA blog further states, quote, "Sky lanterns are made of oiled rice paper with a bamboo frame, materials that can easily catch on fire. A candle or wax fuel cell is used with the device. The lit flame heats the inside of the lantern, causing it to rise into the air. Once lit and airborne, the lantern can travel more than a mile. Wind can affect it, blowing the sides, forcing hot air out and sending the flaming lantern to the ground. These lanterns have the potential to start a fire." In late February, a sky lantern released during a park event in Wisconsin burned more than 15 acres in about an hour, unquote. And now for This Week in UFO History with Jeff Knox.
Hi, I am Jeff Knox. This is This Week in UFO History, where each week I will be sharing cases or important events from the UFO historical record. This week I'll be discussing the famous Project Blue Book Special Report 14, the last Project Blue Book Special Reports. If anyone has seen Stanton Friedman speak before, he discussed Special Report 14 in his lectures all the time. He would also sell copies of it at his booth. But is it all it's cracked up to be? On October 25th, 1955, Project Blue Book Special Report number 14 is released, months after it is completed by analysts at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, using cases supplied by the Air Force and tabulated on IBM punch cards. The original report by Battelle is about 300 pages, but the Air Force distills it down to 100. It is then accompanied by a press release in which the Secretary of the Air Force, Donald A. Quarles, states, quote, "On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States." At the same time, Quarles states that the Air Force is working on radical new aircraft that are sure to be mistaken for flying saucers. Only 100 copies are printed initially, but scientist Leon Davidson prints and sells copies of it beginning in 1956, along with his analysis and commentary. The report includes 3,201 reported UFO sightings. Battelle employs 4 scientific analysts who divide the cases into knowns, unknowns, and a third category of insufficient data. They also break down knowns and unknowns into 4 categories of quality, from excellent to poor. For a case to be considered identified, 2 analysts must independently agree on a solution. For a case to be called unidentified, all 4 analysts must agree. A report classified as unidentified is defined as, quote, "Those reports of sightings wherein the description of the object and its maneuvers could not be fitted to the pattern of any known object or phenomenon." Out of the 3,201 cases, 69% are judged to be identified, 22% are unidentified, and 9% have insufficient information to make a determination. The report further breaks down the results based on whether the identification is considered certain or merely doubtful. For example, in both astronomical and aircraft IFO categories, 12% are considered certain and 9% are doubtful. Overall, of the 69% listed as IFOs, 42% are thought to be solved with certainty, while 27% are still considered doubtful. In addition, if a case is lacking in adequate data, it is placed in the insufficient information category, separate from both IFOs and UFOs. A key feature is to statistically compare IFOs and UFOs by 6 characteristics: color, number of objects, shape, duration, speed, and brightness. If there are no significant differences, the two classes are probably the same. The UFOs then represent merely a failure to properly identify prosaic phenomenon that can already be accounted for IFOs. On the other hand, if the differences are statistically significant, this suggests IFOs and UFOs are indeed distinctly different phenomenon. In the initial results, all characteristics except brightness test significant at less or much less than 1%. Brightness is greater than 5%. By removing astronomical sightings from the knowns and redoing the test, just 2 categories, number and speed, are significant at less than 1%. The remainder having results between 3 and 5%. This indicates that there is a statistically significant difference between the characteristics ascribed to UFOs and IFOs, but perhaps not as significant as the initial results suggested. For 2 characteristics, brightness and speed, the significance actually increases with this revised test. Hynek later calls the Battelle report a shamefully biased interpretation of statistics to support a preconceived notion. Kehoe asked Ruppelt what he thinks. Ruppelt says the report was, quote, "was a shock to me. I was the one that had the IBM system tried out. It didn't prove a thing, and I had written it off as worthless before I left the project. Also, this report was drawn up in 1953, yet the Air Force released it as the latest hot dope in October 1955. The Air Force releases a second edition with a new preface and an addendum that brings the subject up to date in July 1957. In the 1990s, after interviewing 3 men, Art Westerman, Perry Riepel, and William T. Reed, who had participated in the Battelle project, Mark Roediger and Jenny Zeidman of the Center for UFO Studies conclude that the engineering mindset of Battelle had caused a disconnect between its data and its conclusions. Because the project cannot reverse engineer a UFO from the reports, because of faulty witness testimony, multi-causal UFOs, etc., the engineers conclude that a structured craft does not exist. I'd now like to read you the second part of Ruppelt's statement that he published in Max Miller's Saucers, because it better explains the background and purpose of this report. Ruppelt, quote, "Probably the most astounding part of the press release, at least to me, was the statement that a report, based on a study by a private scientific group under the supervision of the Air Technical Intelligence Center, concluded that all but very few UFO sightings could be explained. This was a shock to me because I was the one that had the study made. I worked with the people that made it. I know how they made it. In the first place, the study wasn't made to try and solve the overall UFO problem. It was an attempt to see if a statistical study of UFO reports would give any indication that the UFOs actually were something that we knew nothing about. In other words, something unknown, be the unknowns interplanetary spaceships, a new natural phenomenon, some type of aircraft from some country on this earth, etc. The answer was, after spending considerable amounts of money, statistical methods were no good for a study like this. They did not prove a thing. The results were such that by interpreting them in different ways, you could prove anything you wanted to. This is not a good study. I was out of the Air Force by the time that the report was published in its final printed form, but I saw the unpublished draft and had written it off as worthless," end quote. Now, by the first 4 months of 1955, the Special Report 14 only included up to 1952, they had unidentifieds down to about 3% of reported sightings, which is pretty much where unidentifieds usually hover, around 2 to 5%, depending on whose figures you look at. Significantly less than the very high figure, 22% in Special Report 14. But as Ruppelt explained, the purpose of the study was to determine if UFO reports actually represent unknown. And at that, it failed. The stats can be made to prove anything you wanted it to. And like any study of UFO data, is faulted by the highly subjective nature of interpretation of the individual cases. Many Blue Book unknowns were later satisfactorily solved. Tim Printy continues to review and attempt to find answers to Blue Book unknowns in his Sunlight publication. Don Berlinger originally published a list of Blue Book unknowns for the Fund for UFO Research. This work was later carried on by Brad Sparks, who reviewed the Blue Book cases to produce a catalog of 2,200 unknowns, significantly more than the famous number of 701 you might hear about. I recommend checking out Brad Sparks' catalog, as I reference it daily in my posts that I do. If you'd like to really dig into Special Report 14, read what various UFO groups and researchers thought about this study, this report. Check out the charts, example cases used for the shapes that were shown. Perhaps even read the entire thing. Be sure to check out my post on Twitter or Facebook, where you'll find an assortment of links and resources to check out.
Thank you, Jeff. A seabird took a ride inside a typhoon. What do seabirds do when they end up trapped inside of a giant vortex in the sky? In August of 2019, researchers from Tohoku University tagged 14 streaked shearwaters, a type of seabird, at a breeding ground on the island of Mikurajima, near Tokyo, Japan. A study by Kozue Shiomi, assistant professor of life and environment studies at Tohoku University, was published in the journal Ecology in September. In the abstract, Shiomi writes, quote, "The frequency of intense storms has increased and is predicted to further increase due to climate change. Consequently, it is essential to understand how volant animals survive and navigate under such unusual conditions and evaluate how the increasing frequency of severe storms affects wildlife. However, the information on the behavioral reactions of animals to extreme weather is still limited, given the unpredictability of its occurrence." Unquote. The new study describes how one of these shearwaters appears to have taken a ride inside of the typhoon Fa-Shai, excuse my pronunciation. Fa-Shai passed northward near Mikurajima on the evening of September 8th before hitting mainland Japan in the early hours of September 9th. During this particular time frame, the 14 shearwaters' positions were still being tracked using GPS. While most of the shearwaters appear to have escaped the typhoon, one individual began moving in a rapid series of loops that were synchronized with the typhoon. While shearwaters usually fly under a few hundred meters from the ground at a velocity of less than 100 kilometers per hour, this particular bird appeared to be flying at an altitude of several thousand meters at an average speed of about 100 kilometers per hour. Let's see if we can get this video to work. This video shows the shearwater's path as it follows the typhoon. Let's play that again. As you can see, it moves in multiple spirals along the typhoon's course. Over the course of 11 hours, the shearwater traveled over 200 kilometers, but accounting for the numerous fast loops in their flight, they actually flew over 1,100 kilometers during a period of 11 hours. The shearwater apparently broke away from the storm as soon as it turned east back to the sea, and the shearwater survived. Shiomi observes that this suggests the shearwater may have stayed with the typhoon as it passed over land so as not to be thrown to the ground, which is what frequently happens to juvenile shearwaters. UFOs cannot be tracked using GPS tags the way that seabirds can, but this new finding is a rare instance where researchers were able to track the behavior of an intelligently controlled object as it responded to a high velocity and high energy vortex traveling over land. As we learn more about the behavior of birds during rare and extreme atmospheric events, this can provide general implications for the behavior and flying conditions of anomalous UFOs and intelligently controlled flying objects. And now for Luis Cayetano.
Muted just then. So I'm going to be talking about an article in this month's Scientific American. I already talked about two previously, but I'll talk about another one today. So there's the cover of Scientific American for October 2023. The article is by Lois Parshley, who is an investigative journalist, and she does climate change reporting. The article is called Talking with Animals. It talks about how researchers are using artificial intelligence to try to decipher animal communications. This has got implications for SETI as well, although there's another kind of SETI that I'll talk about. And it's got implications for UAP, which I'll talk about at the end of my segment. So a scientist, or scientists are now studying the New Caledonian crow, which is a type of bird, using AI to find out whether the distinct dialects of these crows around the island could help explain differences in tool making between the groups. These birds are famous for their ability to use tools. They're one of the only few birds which can do that, which we know about. AI is being touted as a revolutionary breakthrough in our ability to decipher animal communication and behavior. Indigenous cultures have long believed that animals can intentionally communicate, although Western science has been more hesitant to take this view for fear of anthropomorphizing other forms of life. The Earth Species Project is building machine learning models to analyze wide-ranging data from a variety of species. Understanding animal vocalizations could help conservation and animal welfare efforts. AI could also usher in a new era mirroring the Copernican revolution, challenging how we see ourselves in relation to the universe. At least that's the hope. Researchers are also using AI to decipher the vocalizations of marine sperm whales. These are majestic whales that live in the sea. They're part of the cetacea, which includes the dolphins, porpoises, and whales. Hopefully a picture of that will show up. But these are one of the species that AI is being applied to. These vocalizations, called codas, are used to identify one another in their social groups. Researchers are recording these codas and what the whales are doing when they make them. Some recordings were fed to a neural network, which was able to correctly identify a subset of individual whales from the codas with 99% accuracy. The team next set out the goal of listening to large areas of the ocean in the hopes of training a computer to learn to speak whale, as it were. Project CETI, Cetacean Translation Initiative. Obviously, CETI is a play on SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. But Project CETI plans to use an underwater microphone to capture Dominica's whales around the clock. Right now, the explosion in technology and the falling price of sensors has led to an explosion in data, far too much for biologists to sift through on their own. So AI is being called in to help. Vast quantities of data are the forte of AI, after all. Current AI models have learned how to self-supervise, automatically learning what's essential and independently creating algorithms of how to predict what words come next in a sequence. In 2017, researchers discovered how to translate between human languages without the need for a Rosetta Stone. This technique is done by turning the semantic relations between words into geometric ones. And machine learning models can now translate between unknown human languages by aligning their shapes, the frequency with which words appear next to each other, for example, to accurately predict what comes next. In 2020, natural language processing began to be able to treat everything as a language, in the words of one researcher. For example, DALL-E2, which is an artificial intelligence software suite, can generate realistic images based on verbal descriptions by mapping the shapes that represent text to the shapes that represent images, and does this with amazing accuracy. This type of multimodal analysis is the kind of translation that deciphering animal communications will require. Animals use different modes of communication simultaneously, just as humans use body language and gestures. Actions made immediately before, during, and after making sounds could provide valuable context for understanding what the animal is trying to convey. These are more data to be fed into the AI to train them. Ethograms, as they're called, are catalogs of behaviors by animals, and AI could discover novel patterns in this data. Already, it's been reported in the journal Nature Communications that a model found previously unrecognized differences in zebrafinch songs. Zebrafinches are a type of bird, by the way, but these songs are used by females to gauge males. So they found that females pay attention to these songs when choosing mates. You can already use AI with a free app called Merlin to find out which species of bird is making a sound from your recording on your phone. It's compared with databases at Cornell University. It's able to identify calls from over 1,000 species with remarkable accuracy. A persistent challenge has been to separate animal sounds from the cacophony of background noise, but progress has already been made on this front as well. The aforementioned Earth Species Project has built a neural network that can pass out the sounds made from different sources and focus on individual sources. Getting AI to analyze bird calls has also got conservation value, as when birds are bred in captivity, their courtship and warning calls can be analyzed and compared to wild populations to help gauge whether some calls have stopped being used and whether reintroduction of those captive populations would be successful, for example. AI could also help us understand our pets. When dogs bark, for example, we tend to only focus on the barking, but dogs, like other domestic animals, use multimodal communication. AI can help us understand what our pets are trying to tell us. Efforts are underway to develop a dog translation program. AI has got implications for farmed animals as well, and whether they are experiencing positive or negative emotions. One such algorithm developed in Denmark has already been trained with thousands of pig sounds to predict the emotional states of pigs. Such technology could help improve animal welfare. While language models are good at finding patterns, they aren't actually deciphering meaning, at least with single mode data, and they aren't always right. It is not even known how algorithms arrive at their conclusions sometimes, making validation more difficult. Learning what a computer itself is doing when it's learning about patterns is important and is essential for understanding the limitations of particular AI models. Returning to CETI, efforts are underway to develop libraries of animal coders and to determine whether these lexicons have the properties of language or not. AI models are being developed that emulate a variety of species with the aim of conversations, quote unquote, with animals. Tests of this sort are slated for zebrafinches. Two-way communications could make it easier to infer meaning of animal vocalizations. This type of two-way communication could pass the animal version of the Turing test. As one researcher notes, the plot twist is that we will be able to communicate before we understand, because these AI algorithms, they're not necessarily understood by us in terms of how they came to their conclusions, but we can still use them. There are, of course, ethical concerns. Imagine if poachers lured schools of fish to a location by impersonating their mates or predators, or imagine if a viral meme was injected into the repertoire of humpback whale sounds or songs, which can spread across the oceans. This could have unknown social consequences. There's obviously the risk of for-profit players to misuse the technology. So these are some of the reasons that guidelines and legislative frameworks are so crucial for tackling this issue. Also, let me just quote this paragraph almost verbatim. Whether animal utterances are comparable to human language in terms of what they convey remains a matter of profound disagreement. Some would assert that language is essentially defined in terms that make humans the only animal capable of language, with rules for grammar and syntax. Excuse me. Skeptics worry that treating animal communication as language or attempting to translate it may distort its meaning. Other researchers, however, dismiss these concerns. While animals may not be saying the equivalent of "pass me the banana," we may still discover some basis for communication in common experiences. For example, expressions of grief or mother or hungry across species. The fossil record shows clear evidence that animals have been vocalizing for many millions of years. To survive this long, vocalizations presumably must be encoding something for something very deep and very true. Some scientists feel that even lacking the underlying physiological correlates in our models, it would fly in the face of evidence to presume that the striking reactions of, for example, sandhill cranes when they lose a member of their nest are devoid of emotion. Therein may lie the ultimate key to real translation, dropping our assumptions and also allowing for the possibility that emotion is an important part of animal life. Let me also just make a little interlude into the extraterrestrial topic and UAP slash UFOs. So obviously we want to be able to, if we ever make communication with extraterrestrials, there's a question about could we understand them? This research that I've just outlined would suggest that yes, we could, but that still remains an open question. And also, this also ties into the UAP topic because there's actually a bunch of shadowy companies right now, startup companies such as Enigma Labs, Phenom Anon or Phenom AI Non, and UPDB. These are actually tied to, arguably, to the intelligence community, and they have touted themselves as doing data analysis for the IC. In terms of getting data from around the world, different platforms, and trying to find patterns in UAP data. So this topic is actually tackled in detail by Jensine Anderson in her book called Hyperconflation. I recommend that everybody check out the interview with her and Jack Brewer on Exploring Frontiers. Anderson delves into the proposed uses of AI to decipher what the UAP are up to, how they work, etc. In her view, the data-centric approach inherent to AI is problematic and is taken from a counterterrorism and intelligence context that may be appropriate to an intraspecies adversarial approach, but that is inadequate to understanding interspecies extraterrestrial interactions. And she would argue that we need a more holistic, relational outlook to be able to decipher alien communications and meaning. Although, I don't know if I agree with that, but maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I think that's all I wanted to say, guys. Thank you.
All right. Let's see, it is 6:33. All right. So, what do you think, Jeff, about this topic?
AI?
Yeah, using AI to understand animal communication.
Yeah, I've always, thought that, would be an interesting idea to try out. I mean, it's something that's been covered in fiction and stuff before, like I was saying in the chat, Apple recently had a TV series, Extrapolations, where it kind of takes place in the near future, like after climate change has kind of devastated a lot of the world and things are bad. And in that show, one of the characters is basically developed AI systems that could talk to whales, and other animals, just like, Louise was talking about. And I think it's, it's potentially possible, but until it actually happens, we'll just have to wait and see. And it also just depends on the fact that do they really have languages, I guess, as we think of things as languages? Like, do they have languages like humans have languages? Is it something that you can even decode into words, like, per se? So it's I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I do think that AI is effective. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't work, but I do think that my main concern is really with the ethics of it. But when it comes to animal communication, I think, I think what we really need to focus more on is like understanding animal communication on its own terms, I guess. I think because when you use an AI model, you're going to be interpreting types of information that might not actually be the most significant, like because if you're talking about multimodal communication, we can only assume most animals don't use like the same kind of syntax or like semiotics that humans do. I think that probably is the case even with cetaceans. Like I don't think that dolphins are out there talking in a language like French. And
verbal communication isn't the only kind of communication, not even with humans.
Oh yeah, I'm not talking. Yeah, and I'm not even talking about verbal. I'm just talking about human language in terms of the way that it's structured into words and sentences. It has a syntax, and that syntax is made up of parts. And I don't think that there are other animals that are like that. I don't think that porpoises talk the way that humans do, is what I'm saying. I mean, I'm obviously not an expert, but I find that to be unlikely. But the other thing that I kept thinking about when I was reading that article was, cat communication. And we know a lot about the way that cats communicate. They leave scent markers. They use body language in a very clear way. When a cat is frightened, they will have a threat display where they kind of like walk sideways, their tail puffs up. But if a cat is relaxed, they'll purr, they'll kind of close their eyes. Like if you want to make friends with a cat, you don't just walk up to them and be really loud, but you crouch down where you are, and you kind of like look away from the cat. Like this is stuff that animal behaviorists understand. So I think that a lot of this communicating with animals is a kind of myth, because it distorts the reality of animal communication, and it also kind of creates this idea that we don't understand animals in a false way, like Luis was talking about in Western science, the way that we tend to separate animals from humans as much as we can. And there are biologists that will make these kinds of arguments of being like, oh, well, there's no way we could ever interpret this behavior as mourning, or that we could ever interpret this behavior as affect, but right, I think we understand animals better than we pretend, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think if we were to actually listen to cats, we would just hear them plotting to murder us all in our sleep. So anyway, but this actually gets into something that a post that I'll be doing this week. I believe, I don't remember the exact date, but it has to do with basically the Drake equation and the foundation of SETI and something called the Order of the Dolphin, which included like John C. Lilly, who was, if you ever seen the movie Altered States, is kind of based on his work, creation of like the flotation tank and sensory deprivation experiments. But he was in the Order of the Dolphin, and there's actually a movie called The Day of the Dolphin about like the CIA or whatever experimentations with dolphins, back in the 70s. But these guys were also SETI guys, because SETI has always been interested in the potential of animal communications and how we might apply that to potential communications in a contact situation with an extraterrestrial race. And so when you look at a lot of SETI books, like they'll actually have chapters dedicated to basically like animal communication and discussing like the, theoreticals and hypotheticals of that, because the ability to speak with an animal really would be not too different than perhaps speaking with an extraterrestrial race. So it's a lot of crossovers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
There is a issue though about technological civilizations. They would presumably need some sort of translation or transmission mechanism for information, which is analogous to our language, because you need a highly recursive system to be able to capture embedded meaning. And so I don't think that anything that's evolved in that way it's going to be the same as like a so-called non-intelligent animal. There's going to be something different. I mean, there is definitely something different and unique about human language compared to other animals. I think something analogous may hold for extraterrestrials, which are visiting us, with their spaceships and so on, because you would require something like language to be able to have spaceships.
Yep. And, that's why one of my favorite movies that I think, could potentially be one of the more accurate movies about how an encounter with aliens would go is the movie Arrival, where the main character is a language specialist, and she's got to figure out how to communicate with this species that really is not like anything we expect, and that doesn't communicate in a way that we expect or kind of within our, models of thinking. It's that's, I love that movie. But
yeah, me too.
We kind of expect aliens, maybe because of all the science fiction, to look like us, act like us, have the same kind of behavioral patterns as us, same motives, and, and would speak like us. But that, isn't necessarily true. It's entirely likely, in fact, it's possibly even more likely, that alien life would be so unrecognizable to us that we wouldn't recognize it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, or it might not even be life. It might just be some other complex system, that,
what is life? There's lots of definitions.
Yeah, there could be other complex systems that resist entropy, that resemble life in nature. It's something that I've thought about a lot. It's like, why does it have to be life? Like if you look at the game of life, for example, it's like, it's, there are things that are able to reproduce, like, those gliders and glider guns or whatever. But like you could also just make a Turing machine in the game of life. There's some great YouTube videos of that where, you just use those little things in the game of life to make a computer in the game of life, and then you can just do whatever you want to with it, like, so there could be all sorts of systems in nature that we don't know about. And so, like, even when we talk about life, yeah, sure, life is probably common in the universe, but it's probably not going to be the same as what we are used to at all. It's probably going to be really weird. It could be based on different molecules like methane or whatever, yeah. Anyway,
bring me back to my younger days when, my computer science days, where we actually had to like program, life simulations, like running with life simulations, or had to do things like programming games, like the one that's called Code War, where you kind of created these like self-autonomous little like blocks that moved in a two-dimensional plane that kind of had to make decisions, kind of like, much like life. But you can actually, I think you may have just mentioned it, like simulate Turing machines, inside the game of life. Yeah. And then it's been proven that you can basically simulate any advanced complex language or machine on top of the simplistic Turing machines.
Once you have a Turing machine, you can do whatever you want to. It's just a matter of, how much processing power, basically.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I did have a question for you, Jeff, though, about Special Report 14 of Blue Book. I wish I'd sent this to you. I did send it in the private chat. It's on my website, ufologiescorrupt.com. Alan Hendry, in his book about UFOs in 1979, he dealt with the statistics in ufology. And he does have a section there about Special Report 14. Now, that report used a chi-square analysis, didn't it? The Patel Institute, I think they use a chi-square analysis to try to distinguish UFOs from IFOs.
Yeah, I believe so. Because that was the whole point of the study.
One of the criticisms that's been made by Hendry and others is that chi-square analysis is very sensitive to data which is not perfect. And if you look at the actual profiles of the data for IFOs versus UFOs, qualitatively, they look very, very similar.
Yeah.
So like when one goes up, the other goes up. When one goes down, the other goes down, basically.
Pretty much.
But like when you do the chi-square analysis, it seems to be significant, but that's just because the chi-square is very sensitive to imperfect data. So I think that's something that people should be more aware of. Stanton Friedman actually in one of his books where he was defending the ET hypothesis, he actually quoted the chi-square analysis, but he didn't deal with the implicit problems in it. He was later challenged by astronomers and others. He didn't really give a good response, I don't think.
Yeah, he would, like I mentioned at the beginning of my segment, he would regularly talk about, it wasn't all of his lectures, but he had a certain lecture he would do where it was primarily on Special Report 14. And he would kind of make the argument, like he'd bring out the fact that there was, even Special Report 14 proves that 22% were unidentified. This really means something's going on. And so he would seem to kind of cherry pick like what he wanted out of Special Report 14, but while also dismissing the stuff that, like, you know, he didn't like out of it. And I don't think he gave a whole lot of consideration into the actual statistical analysis.
Yes.
But yeah, I didn't read that section, and I didn't include that section in my post from Alan Hendry's book. I'll have to pull that off the shelf and give that a read. Let me just read something real quick here. They kind of even mention some of this in their summary here. See, they say, as I mentioned, the point was to figure out if there's a real difference between the UFOs and IFOs. And as you look at the charts, the difference seems to be negligible. Like even they say, 3 to 5% difference, like at most. Like, so that's not a whole lot. But okay, so in order to discover any pertinent trend or pattern inherent in the data, and to evaluate or explain any trend or pattern found, appropriate methods of reducing these data from reports of unidentified aerial objects to a form amenable to scientific appraisal were employed. In general, the original data upon which the study was based consisted of impressions or interpretations of apparently unexplainable events, and seldom contained any reliable measurements of any physical attributes. This subjectivity of data presented a major limitation to the drawing of significant conclusions. They then go on to say, but it doesn't invalidate the application of the scientific methods in which they used. So, I mean, not only was their statistical analysis kind of like, faulty and had issues, as everyone from Hynek to Ruppelt to Henry or whatever pointed out, the actual data they were using was highly subjective in the first place. Like, it really depended on what you considered known or unknown, and the data was always mostly just based on reports, not any actual collected evidence of any physical nature or any sense of data. And even the cases they looked at, like if the shapes that were shared, that has been highly criticized as well, because many of those cases aren't really representative of what people were seeing, or that was even in the Blue Book files. Like one of them was the propeller-looking object, and this object was basically only seen in one case ever, and yet they used it as one of the handful of example common shapes and configure. Yeah, the one in the top left up there. So this report's been highly criticized, and you have even a lot of the pro kind of UFO proponents and ETH kind of like guys, saying that this report was basically worthless. So, but yet it's still kind of put out there, and people still kind of reference the data, and they use it as an example of why there's a true distinct difference between IFOs and UFOs, which is what the report was trying to study. Now, if you look at Brad Sparks' Blue Book's Unknown catalog, he also gets into Special Report 14, and he says it's a dishonest debunker tactic to claim that if there was more data, many of these UFOs would become IFOs. I don't really agree with that, because we see that in this report itself. Like in the data from 1952 up to 1952 in the report, they were up to 22%, unknowns. But by 2 years later, as a consequence of both improved training of their investigators, better reporting methods, and further detailed analysis of cases, those unidentifieds were already down to 3%.
Yeah.
But
that's analogous to the latest reports by the Department of Defense, right? That initially was a big chunk of unknowns, and then it got much smaller in subsequent.
And that's what you would expect, as time goes on, they get better at analyzing these cases, and So, in fact, the Blue Book, like you mentioned, the Arrow reports are not all too different than these special Special Report 14, or really any of the earlier status reports from Grudge or Blue Book that you can look at, and the actual percentages are fairly the same as well. Like these days, most unknowns are down to 2 to 5%.
Yes.
And I'll point out one of the big arguments is the difference between people say, well, if they didn't have enough data, then that wouldn't be an unknown. That goes into insufficient information, and that's true to an extent. But just because something's an unknown does not still mean it's necessarily not a prosaic phenomenon. There still can be not enough data. Basically, what they're saying is like you have enough data to determine it's an IFO. If you don't have enough data to determine it's an IFO, it can still be an unknown. It's not really demonstrating that they had really, really good data and they still could not find a solution. And this is something people still argue with the error reports, right? They're like, well, they could have really good data on some of these unknown cases. I'm not sure that's the case. Maybe they do, but they've given no indication that that's the case. So, and people need to remember, unknown does not mean UFO. It could mean many different things, and it could still mean something that could be an IFO with more investigation or more data.
Yes.
So,
And
the data is weak.
So. And the target, for Arrow is really to find unknowns that are significant to defense. So they're not looking for exotic phenomena primarily. They're primarily looking for foreign technology. So like the target. But it like with Project Blue Book, they were looking at UFOs. I mean, it was primarily for defense purposes, but I think that they were looking at a broader category. But even still, that when they're talking about UFOs, they were talking about like UFOs that just like the military didn't know what they are, and so Arrow's like, we're just trying to resolve the anomalies. Like that's the goal. Yep. Like Arrow is a debunking. Like Arrow's full of debunkers because they're just trying to resolve what these phenomena are.
Well, they're debunkers as long as they don't come to the conclusion you're hoping for. But whenever they put something out that supports your viewpoint, then all of a sudden, good for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is that that's kind of my point is that like the goal of Arrow is to debunk. Like if you think about the definition of the term debunk, that's what Arrow's trying to do, because that's what you're supposed to do in UFO investigations. Like you're supposed to figure out what the things are.
That's why there's such kind of this cognitive dissonance of this idea that the government's going to disclose to you the truth. At the same time, you're accusing them of, never disclosing the truth, and they're hiding it. And if they come out and say, hey, there's nothing to see, we didn't find anything, then they're just going to be accused of covering it up all over again. Like I find it kind of hilarious that people look to the government for answers like on this topic, and that they and the selective way in which they kind of determine what they can trust and what they can't trust. They're more than willing to cherry pick what will support their view and dismiss what doesn't, even from the exact same people, sometimes even on the same day. So, it's.
All right. And for a story to close out on tonight, Johnny Cash said he saw a UFO while on a visit to Jamaica. On Friday, UFO historian Kurt Collins posted this neat story on his website, blueblurrylands.com. Johnny Cash, also known as the Man in Black, was a famous American country singer-songwriter. The story was originally reported in the Abilene Reporter by Dick Kleiner in 1981. Describing the object, Cash is quoted as saying, quote, "Somebody said they saw a shooting star, so I was looking up at the sky, and I saw this object whiz by. It made a strange noise, a noise I really can't describe, and I think the shape was oval, and the color was new to me, purple or rose, I'm just not sure. It was gone before I could even point it out to my friends. I don't know what it was. All I know is that I saw it, and it was unearthly, unquote. Before we go, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our brand new channel, the UFO Detox Hour. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos. We would love to see your very tiny faces and other profile icons in the live chat. A great plus for joining the live chat is that you can give us constructive feedback live on the air, especially if we make any factual errors. Please also be sure to consider checking out our respective content. I can be found at the Earth YouTube channel. Please also visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com, and you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on Twitter and Facebook. Jeff Knox spends all of his time studying UFOs, and he doesn't make any money off of it. Please, please, please consider visiting his Patreon page and becoming a patron of Jeff Knox. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Luis. A pleasure as always. Shout outs to Xerxiax, the Bed Goblin, a few unspecified dragons, Eddie Boular, sorry for mispronouncing your name all these years, Jenny Randalls, Jerome Clark, Daniel Cohen, David Hufford, Etzel Cardania, Jeff Whitebear Kingsbury, who has a Monday morning meditation on his show. Just amazing. Steve Long, Heidi Beetle, Collie Butterfly, Stephanie Quick, Kai of the Creek, Sweet and Awful, Liminal Garrett, Jeremy Puma, Emily Dickinson, Charles Fort, Ozma, Princess of Oz, Flame Princess, the Lady of Darkness, the Wit whose name begins with P, Guy the Eternal Revelation, Meryl, Special Agent, Jason Spooky Conger, Special Agent Dale Cooper, Mark Pilkington, Emeralda Cyan Orb, Rachel Nevada, Shadow Witch, Rachel Nelson, Fairy Replicant, Rachel Nelson's mom, my sister Aresh Kigal, our anonymous human inter, our sister 9 times hidden, our sister 7 times hidden, our sister 99 times hidden, the lower witch of the lava, HW, the coyotes in my neighborhood, Jeff Knox, and Luis Cayetano. Also, special thanks to Simon Fly, Duncan Frere, Steve Long, and I'm forgetting someone. I'm sorry, but let me see.
Dorothy. You have to thank Dorothy. Without her, none of this is possible.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. They're just people you don't know. A lot of them are actually my. Oh, thank you, Aaron Fizz, for stopping by. And thank you, Vancouver guy. I don't know who that is, but he's really smart.
Crazy, obsessed UFO weirdo, probably. Guy seems to spend way too much time on UFOs or something. Must have no life at all.
Thank you all for being patient with us, and we are so grateful for everyone that joined in the chat. We're grateful for the lurkers too. Not lurkers, lurgers with a G. Thank you for lurking. All right. Any parting words, Luis, Jeff?
No. Just check me out on Twitter and see you guys next week.
See ya.
Peace.